They said he smiled when he robbed you. They said he spoke calmly, that he said please, and that he tipped his hat as though the whole thing were a misunderstanding that could be settled politely if everyone behaved reasonably. History loves those details. It repeats them carefully. The way people repeat comforting stories, smoothing the edges a little more each time until what remains feels less like a crime and more like a charming interruption. His name was Ezra Allen Miner. Though he spent most of his life believing his true name was William Allen Miner, he never legally changed it. History, for its part, shortened it anyways. Bill Miner was easier to remember. And it was Bill Miner, not Ezra or William, who became known as Bill Miner, the gentleman bandit. Not because he was gentle, not because he was noble, but because he made crime easier to look at. Miner was born in 1847 in Jackson County, Kentucky, into a century that had little patience for softness and even less for hesitation. It was a world that rewarded endurance, punished weakness, and discarded men as soon as they stopped being useful. Miner learned early how to keep moving. His criminal career did not begin with trains, it began with stagecoaches. By the mid-1860s, he was already being arrested in California for robbery, moving through county jails like San Joaquin, Placer, and Calavera. He was released, rearrested, imprisoned again, and released again. This cycle would define his life. Miner was not an impulsive criminal. He was methodical. He planned, he watched, and he learned. And he developed something that would later become his signature: control. Control over himself, control over situations, and control over the people he frightened. One early partnership ended brutally. His accomplice, Bill Leroy, was caught and lynched. Miner escaped. That lesson stayed with him. By 1880, Miner had been discharged from prison yet again, but he did not retire. He refined. While Miner aged in and out of prison, the world outside him changed. Railroads spread across North America, turning distance into inconvenience and money into something that moved faster than people. Wealth no longer needed a face. It could be locked in safes, listed in ledgers, and shipped through towns without ever stopping. Railroads became symbols, power without names, corporations without expressions. So when Miner eventually turned his attention from stagecoaches to trains, he wasn't simply escalating his crimes. He was adapting to the century he lived in. And the audience was ready. In November 1901, shortly after being released from San Quentin, Miner took part in a payroll train robbery in the United States. It was carefully planned and calmly executed. Witnesses later described a man who spoke politely, avoided unnecessary violence, and focused only on the money. There were guns, of course. There was fear. Cooperation was not optional. But Miner's restraint mattered to the people who told the story afterwards. Calm became kindness, control became character, and politeness began to outweigh coercion in the public memory. The robbery succeeded. Miner escaped. Newspapers followed. They did not describe a desperate criminal. They described a man out of a time. Someone who behaved as though robbery were a profession with rules and manners. Headlines lingered on his demeanor more than his actions. Miner was no longer just stealing, he was performing. And audiences, then as now, are remarkably forgiving of performers who know their lines. After his third major prison term, Miner crossed into Canada, settling in British Columbia under the alias George Edwards. By then, he was no longer young. He carried decades of experience and the physical costs of prison with him. In September of 1904, a train was robbed near Silverdale, east of Vancouver. The robbery was quickly attributed to Miner and has remained associated with his name ever since, though neither he nor his accomplices were ever conclusively proven to be responsible. But the uncertainty did nothing to slow the legend. Also around this time, another story began to follow Miner through British Columbia. According to local historians, after the first robbery, Miner is believed to have hidden part of the stolen money in the forest near Green Lake and the 70-Mile House region. The terrain was remote, thick with timber and distance, the kind of place where secrets could be buried easily and retrieved quietly. Some believe Miner later recovered the money and used it to fund his escape and continued movement. Others believe it was never retrieved at all, and that somewhere in those forests the cash remains, hidden, just waiting for somebody patient enough or foolish enough to keep looking. No proof has ever settled the question. The legend did not need confirmation, it only needed possibility. What came next was certain. Later, in 1904, Miner and two accomplices attempted another payroll train robbery near Kamloops, at a place known as Ducks, now Monte Creek. This time, something went wrong. They chose the wrong car. The entire haul amounted to $15 and a bottle of kidney pills Miner picked up from a shelf. It was not the stuff of legend. It was small, awkward, and deeply human. After an extensive manhunt, Miner and his companions were found near Douglas Lake eating lunch in the woods. Miner identified himself as George Edwards and claimed they were prospectors. The officers were not convinced. When the posse moved in, one accomplice attempted to fire and was shot in the leg. He surrendered pretty quickly. Another was disarmed without incident. Miner never drew his weapon. Even in failure, the image held. Miner's arrest and trial in Kamloops became a media spectacle. Supporters gathered, newspapers followed every detail. The most damaging evidence against him was not a gun or stolen money, but the bottle of kidney pills taken during the robbery. It was enough. Miner and his accomplices were transported to the provincial penitentiary in New Westminster, and in 1907, Miner escaped again. Legends require escape, I guess. This time, he did not remain in Canada. He returned to the United States, resuming criminal activity in the South. In Gainesville, Georgia, he was arrested, imprisoned, escaped, and imprisoned again. The pattern continued until his body could no longer keep pace with his reputation. William Miner died on September 2nd, 1913, at the prison farm in Milledgeville, Georgia. The cause was gastritis, likely contracted after drinking brackish water during a previous escape attempt. There were no headlines this time, no performance, no applause. Years later, it was discovered that even in death, the story had failed to line up cleanly. Miner's headstone was in the wrong location. His name was spelled incorrectly. The year of his death was wrong. A new marker was eventually placed in the correct spot, with the correct information. The original stone was left where it stood, an error preserved beside the correction. William Miner was buried. Bill Miner lived on. His legend grew. In British Columbia, his name became attached to pies, pubs, murals, songs, restaurants, and even a mountain. His image appeared in decor. Drinks were named in his honor. His watch became a museum artifact, later stolen and later recovered. A man who rubbed trains politely became a cultural mascot. This was not an accident. Bill Miner did not rob trains to make a political statement. He did not redistribute wealth. He did not imagine himself a hero. He robbed trains because it worked, because he knew how, and because he believed he could control the outcome. Everything else was added later. History did not lie about Bill Miner. It edited him. It shortened his name. It softened his crimes. It remembered his manners and forgot the fear. Because a polite criminal is easier to admire than the truth about crime itself. There is a quiet irony at the center of the gentleman bandit myth. Miner's politeness did not make him virtuous. It made him useful. A lone outlaw with charm was easier to romanticize than the systems he stole from. A man could be forgiven. A corporation could not. So we let manners substitute for morality. We let presentation outweigh harm. We let a please carry more weight than a threat. History does this often. It forgives people not for what they did, but for how they made us feel while they were doing it. William Miner did not become a legend because he was a gentleman. Bill Miner did. Because history prefers its criminals well-spoken, its violence understated, and its discomfort wrapped in charm. Truth does not need polish, but we keep reaching for it anyways. Because sometimes a lie that says please feels easier to accept than a truth that doesn't ask permission at all. This is Truthish. Thanks for watching.